Welcome to the Vandy Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Lee. Our guest today will be Seabass of WNWS in Jackson, Tennessee. This episode presented by Wellspire, Nashville's Learning and Development Center. Wellspire offers personal and professional development opportunities in a beautiful facility in the Gulch neighborhood. Stop by for an event with world-renowned speakers or host an off-site event that will wow your team or your clients. We also thank our co-sponsor, the Well Coffee House, which turns coffee into water and has a mission to bring clean water to the world. Today's news presented by Sutherland and Belk, an SEC sports-loving injury firm in Nashville. These folks will shoot you straight on your rights and options when you've been injured in an accident. Call them at 615-846-6200 to get your questions answered. You can also visit them online at sbinjurylaw.com. Vanderbilt heads to Athens, Georgia for a 3-game series with the Bulldogs starting Friday night at 6 Central. Drake Fellows, as always, will be Vanderbilt's Game 1 starter. This series, for first place in the SEC East. Our friend Seabass joins us, as he does every week, from WNWS in Jackson, Tennessee. My friend, I've got a funny story to open the podcast with today. First of all, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm fantastic. By the way, who is
this? We're on the deadline today. So anyway, I take my son to preschool every Tuesday and Thursday after I take my daughter to kindergarten. And this is the third year he's been in the preschool. He'll go to kindergarten next year. And so we kind of see the same families in his class. And one of the families, the husband, is a roving minor league instructor for an American League team. So I always see him, and they're based in Nashville. We always say hello and talk. Super guy. And so he knows what I do, and he knows the Vandy staff. And he's always asking me, how's everything going there? And what's up on the beat? So we're talking. So this guy's been out of town for 2 months, and he hasn't kept up with anything. And so it's funny. He asked me, and his wife is standing there. So he's like, so what's up on the Vandy beat? And I said, well, since you've gone, they got a new AD, and then the old AD died the next week, and then we lost 20 in a row in basketball, and then they fired the coach. And as I'm saying this, you can see their jaws just drop as I'm going. And then he's like, and then the chancellor resigned yesterday, and now it looks like they're going to hire Jerry Stackhouse. So I got my plate full. But it was just funny as I kind of went through all that. It's it is just crazy how much stuff has happened in the last couple of months. And it seems like that's a recurring theme over the last 8-9 months.
And not only is so much happening, big things, you know what I mean? Huge, huge stuff. I will say this, you're not going to suffer from want of content anytime soon.
I'm not kidding you. I think more has happened. I used to complain this about being a boring beat. I think more stuff has happened maybe in the first 4 months of this year than happened my first dozen years doing this.
And one of the most stable things you have going right now is Vanderbilt football.
Well, I was going to say you, but that'll work too.
Well, that goes without saying, brother. Yeah, man, good Lord. Where in the world do we start today?
Well, let's start on hoops, I guess. And then I'm going to go to the mailbag because I think the mailbag segment alone could take us a while. And I've got 30 minutes today before I've got to go. So
no problem.
I mean, it looks like it's still going to be Jerry Stackhouse from everything I hear. I would be surprised if it's not. So what do you think?
Well, a couple of days ago, this was right after, I think it might have been the day after you had mentioned something about Jerry Stackhouse being a possibility, and a couple of names that kind of caught people off guard. The more I thought about it and looking at some of the other names that were a possibility, I sent Chris a text. I said, am I crazy or am I wrong to start getting a little bit excited about the Stackhouse thing? And look, I mean, a detractor can right away say, where's the college experience? And I hear you. I certainly hear that. My first question would be, and I know there's a lot of people in the Casey Alexander camp, and I got no beef with that if it were to be him too. But my first thought was, okay, well, who would we be passing over in the name of Jerry Stackhouse? What college-ready coach is chomping at the bit to take this job that we're passing over to take a guy who has no college coaching experience? And, I didn't really come away with anything overwhelming that made me say, we can't do this. We're going to miss out on blank.
I think they had people interested in that job. Now, once you get into the particulars of how much and buyouts and those sorts of things, then it's not fair for me to sit in Malcolm Turner's seat and tell you what they should or shouldn't have done. But I think they could have gone out and gotten a much more established coach if that's really what they wanted to do.
I didn't say that. I didn't say they couldn't have gotten a much more established coach. All I'm saying is that at that time when I sent you that text, I wasn't hearing names of people who were beating down the door to get this job, and not that it may have happened after a tournament was over here and there. But I mean, here's an opportunity for you to now, if you want to tell me the names of the people that they could have had instead of Jerry Stackhouse.
I'm going to decline on that for now. First of all, I don't know for a fact, but some of these are names that people would know.
And see, here's the thing, but we don't know them. You might, but we don't. So from my angle, that's why I was looking at it like this, because now you might tell me later on down the line, here's who they could have had, and maybe I changed my mind about it. But from the names that I've seen so far, I'm all right with that. And what do we hear about Jerry Stackhouse? Demands hustle, is a fiery coach who gets after it. And, look, you got the AAU connections. And here's another question for you. For Vanderbilt fans who are up in the air about this hire, maybe you didn't have skin in the game, but what did you think about it when Penny Hardaway was hired? He didn't have any college experience. He's a high school coach for a little bit. He had a lot of success, was in the AAU game, had an outstanding NBA career, and a name that kids knew. You check for all those things except for the high school for Jerry Stackhouse. So why is Memphis such a grand hire and Vanderbilt would be just – now, if you want to point out maybe, Penny's not using Memphis to get somewhere else, and potentially Jerry Stackhouse could if the NBA came calling, or who knows, if North Carolina came calling. But my response would be to that, and I don't want to have to do this over again, but if they come calling, it's going to be because he's balled out at Vanderbilt and he's winning and he's turned this thing around. They're not going to come calling if it's just like we've had, you know what, Chris? Call me crazy. Sign me up. I'm ready. I'm ready for something different.
Okay, two things on Penny. First of all, I think the jury is way out on whether he's any good as a coach or not. And let me clarify one thing. We don't know what Jerry Stackhouse is. All we have to do are to draw comps of people who are similar, who've come before him. The track record, I think, is mixed at best. Now, people are individuals, and this kind of route is sort of a new thing. So I'm not ready to say that's going to make Jerry Stackhouse a failure. I'm just trying to be as middle of the road about this as I can. So don't take this as I'm dogging the guy. But I think, the track record of these kind of guys is shaky for the most part. Some have done some decent things. I mean, Avery Johnson, I wouldn't call Avery Johnson like a failure at Alabama. He just didn't do what they wanted him to do. I mean, he did get to the tournament a time or two. Alabama was competitive, but the rising tide in the SEC, man, you look at the coaches, and that was Bryce Drew's problem, is he couldn't match wits with the guys in the league. So if a guy that hadn't been there, that had coached 6 years in college before, had trouble with it. Now, again, that doesn't mean that has to be the same with Jerry Stackhouse. I'm not saying that. It does beg some questions, and I'm certainly getting those from people I know who are close to that program and pretty connected in basketball circles. I get a lot of that kind of thing. B, with Penny Hardaway, the minute they signed him, that was basically a guarantee they were going to get the number one player in the country. There's no such thing that comes with getting Jerry Stackhouse. Again, I'm not trying to be negative about Jerry Stackhouse. I wish him the best. God knows I'd like something else other than 20 losses in a row to cover, but I think those are the concerns.
And they're legitimate concerns, but think about this from the fan standpoint. If we don't know who those other names are, and all you can give us is Casey Alexander and potentially Shaka Smart if there was a buyout and whatnot, then it's kind of hard to be hyped up about somebody else if we don't even know who they are.
And that's fair enough. I'm going to say the odds are, if they really went hard after a more established coach, they could have gotten one, whether it's those names or whether it's somebody else. I think that's fair to say. The Vanderbilt job may have lost some luster, but it didn't lose that much luster.
And I agree with that. And look, it's clear that the North Carolina connections are there, and he plans on taking advantage of those. And Malcolm certainly has that as well. I mean, you could do worse from drawing from that lineage, but look, after the last 2 years, after 13th and 14th, and after progressively getting worse, and after being soft as a water sandwich, man, I'm ready for a little shake 'em up. People say, well, you just wait to see how bad they fall down. How does it get worse than this? How does it get worse? It doesn't get any worse than this. I mean, like I said, the whole thing about him taking another job somewhere else, I'm not in love with the idea of him doing it again, but dadgum, Chris, nobody's going to come after a losing basketball coach, and no matter what their name is. And best I can tell, this is an opportunity for an injection of some excitement in there. And hey, I would have been just fine with Casey Alexander. I'd have been just fine with Shaka Smart. But I got to be honest with you. I'm liking, the more I read about Jerry Stackhouse as a coach, not the player, but just as a coach, limited as that may be, the better I'm starting to feel about it.
I'm going to go to our mailbag, which is sponsored by Vanderbilt fan and independent insurance agent Josh Minton of Brentwood. Need home, auto, motorcycle renters or landlord insurance, life insurance, or commercial insurance? Josh is a guy you need to contact. Call him 615-933-1979. Email him at josh@hqinsurance.com. Follow him on Facebook at JD Minton HQ. He's my insurance agent. Give him a try, and you'll be pleased. Okay, Crime Door says, for either of us, in this process, I haven't seen much discussion about Jerry Stackhouse's possible ties to the UNC basketball academic fraud scandal. He played there in the 1990s, and according to a news report out of North Carolina, was in the African American Studies Department. That, of course, was the department at the center of UNC's fake classes scandal. Do you know what Vanderbilt has done, whether Vanderbilt's done its due diligence into looking into possible involvement with this, and how would he deal with the academic requirements for Vandy student athletes? Are you surprised they seem to be going forward with this in light of that?
I'll yield to you first in case you have any information on that.
No, that's not an angle that I have explored, but as someone said to me, he may be in for a shock once he gets to Vanderbilt. And I think that was meant in terms of just the way things operate there, probably as opposed to what he dealt with at UNC.
Well, and that is certainly true, but I mean, a couple things here. We're going to be in transition. We're having a new chancellor, and I mean, that could have a huge effect. And the Malcolm Turner effect comes into play here. Carolina guy. I mean, I'm quite sure Malcolm knows about all that. I would imagine they've done their due diligence, or at least planning on doing so. I don't think anybody's going to be caught off guard or surprised by this. You know it. They know it. It's clearly not a deterrent at this point. So, I don't know if it's a matter of them just saying it doesn't bother us, or we've looked at it and we feel comfortable with this hire.
There's a difference to me also in being a student in that and being the person who oversaw it.
Yeah, I ride with that.
Next question from Mr. Vandy. How does Seabass think the hiring of a new chancellor, what effect do you think it will have on the athletic department?
Man, what an important hire, right, Chris? I mean, good grief. I mean, all these changes going on, and if we just get a carbon copy of Nick Zeppos, I mean, I don't know that much changes. The question is, and look, Zeppos, his approach is what it is, but it's not just him. There are other people that are like-minded there. And, if someone is appointed that's, basically just another Nick Zeppos, then I don't think anything's going to change. The question is, and that's the whole deal. It's almost impossible to answer without knowing who that hire is going to be. A, who's in charge of that hire, Chris, and who's the one going to be making that decision. B, how long is it going to be before that gets done? I wouldn't think it would be an immediate thing by any stretch of the imagination. But the end result is whoever it is going to have a major effect on it. The question, will that be positive or negatively?
Yeah, that's too early to really tell. I was told that search will probably take 8 to 12 months, by the way.
8 to 12 months. Okay. Well, it's fine. It's certainly, it's definitely a desirable job. There's no question about that. Do we know who is going to be in charge of that hire?
Obviously the board, I would think the Ingrams, well, I know the Ingrams would be heavily involved. I don't know. I guess Bruce Evans is the chair of the board. Obviously he would be very involved. And, oh man, I'm going blank on some of the other names of the board members. Was it Ann Price, I guess, that was over the athletic search partially, although I don't know that means she's going to be over this as well. But obviously the Ingrams and Bruce Evans, I think, would be the point people on this.
Now, let me ask you this. I wouldn't think this would be the case at all, but I guess it bears asking. All right, so we've been told that there are plans in the very near future for athletic upgrades. We don't know what they all are. People aren't saying, but just that they're coming. Does this change that in any way?
Funny you should say that. I got a text along those lines today, and without going into a great amount of detail, and I've not had time to dig in on the whys, one person thought that losing Zeppos actually might not be the best thing because I think, again, some of the stuff is starting to emerge. I can't talk about it yet, but they're going to spend massive amounts of money on sports. That's the plan. Stuff that's kind of blown me away, if you want me to be honest about it. Now, they've got to announce it and do it.
Massive amounts. Let me ask you this before you go any further and expound on it. When you say massive amounts for Vanderbilt or massive amounts?
No, I think these are massive amounts.
Okay.
So I don't know. The thing that happened this week was Zeppos stepping down. I don't think anybody knew that was coming until the night before. So this whole thing, wouldn't that be weird after all this time that Nick Zeppos stepping down would be bad for athletics? Now, I don't know that that's what I believe, but if they had everything in line where they were going to go forth to raise enormous amounts of money for a capital campaign, I'm thinking through this as we do the podcast. Surely I wouldn't think that plan would change with the next chancellor. If the board and the universities decided that's a big deal, then I think the next guy just steps in and assumes the role of helping make that happen. So I can't really tell you how that would affect things. That just was an interesting message that I got today.
Well, and what's interesting is because we know that one of the things that I think precipitated some of this was the fact that Chancellor Zeppos was embarrassed by what happened with Adam and Joe's articles and whatnot, and that push several months back. Well, that's not going to have anything to do with the new chancellor. There's no embarrassment for him or her, whoever. They haven't been there, and that seemed like it kind of got the ball rolling. Do you think that's one of the reasons why that could potentially be a bad thing?
Maybe, but. Again, I think that supposedly the buy-in for this kind of thing is greater than it's ever been. So I don't know why you would change that. And one other thing, I mentioned this on the board, we're going to try to cover the chancellor search like we would a coaching search. Now, it's going to be longer and more protracted. I'm going to have to work on some sources there, but kind of one of my points in doing that is not to try to throw anybody in the bus or anything, but just try to look at, okay, these are the names that are coming up, and then say, what are that person's ties or affinities to sports? Was this person a chancellor somewhere else? If so, how did that person treat sports while he was at that institution? That kind of thing. And I think it could be interesting in terms of the sports community over there, at least kind of bringing some light to what's going on so people maybe know what's ahead.
Yeah, I mean, and that certainly makes a lot of sense. The only thing about that, as far as keeping up with it like that, is the reality is that I would imagine, and I'm just throwing a figure out there, but 90% of that board, our board, is not going to know who any of these people are. I
You
mean,
mean they can't? Oh, yeah. Well, who knows? I don't know. But that's the point. If you're covering, you say, okay, here's who this person. This is where they're from. This is their record. And then we got our community will start looking stuff up, and we got a lot of people there now. And
oh, that's true.
It's crazy how many connections people on our board have. I mean, it's rare that a name comes up, like even a coach or something, that somebody doesn't know the guy or somebody doesn't know somebody who knows him. The point of us doing what we're going to do with that, if I'm able to pull it off, and I don't plan to let it take anything away from our sports coverage, but I do think it's important, especially after what Vanderbilt has been through over the last 50 or 60 years with athletics. I think the fan base deserves to know, okay, here's who your chancellor candidates might be. Here's what they think about sports, and they deserve to have somewhat of a voice in this. Not like a mob kind of thing, but I don't think that Vanderbilt can afford to go backwards with this. And I'm not claiming that it would, but I think that's kind of the role that maybe we'll play is, again, not trying to tar and feather anybody or anything close to that. That's not what I mean, but just saying, okay, here's who's out there and here's what it would mean, and just giving people the information and letting them do with it and process it as they wish.
Oh, yeah, I understand what I mean. I'm saying, look, like when we're talking about a coaching search or a coordinator search or even an AD search, a lot of the times most of us are going to know these names, and I'm certainly for you covering this, and it'll be interesting. If you can dig up that type of information on these cats, it'll be neat. It'll just be a different spin.
And that's what we're for. That's what we're there for.
Yeah, I've never seen a chancellor hot board before. I mean, I'm interested to see what that looks like. Not that I'm against it by any stretch of the imagination.
And I'll tell you where I got this idea. I got it from Neil McCready at the Ole Miss site because they're going to do that. I would have never thought of this if it hadn't been for them. So I'll probably check in with them and see how that's going as we get this underway. But a couple more questions before we both get out of here for the day. Let's see. Jake C4VU, with the rumors of spread concepts and a player stating their objective is to score 50 points per game. I've not seen that, but that's interesting. Do you guys think the offense will get better under coordinator Jerry Godowski or possibly regressing? Andy Ludwig coordinated a ton of high-profile games for big programs before we got him, giving him tenured perspective to shape his offense for those challenges. Jerry has only had MAC experience as coordinator and positional coaching while at Vanderbilt.
Yeah, I think our the 50-point reference might have been, I want to say, may have been Keyshawn Vaughn talking to Aaron Dugan. I think that's where I heard that, because I heard something similar to that. As far as the transition from Andy to Jerry, I don't know. I don't know how much different it's going to be. One thing that you mentioned is that you saw in the brief time that you were able to cover in spring, and what you saw was just the tempo of getting things done in and out, getting plays in and out, and moving at a little bit more rapid tempo. 50 points is not going to happen, obviously, in the SEC, and it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but it just kind of references the type of skill position players that they have right now and how explosive this offense can be. Most of those games are not going to end up being like Baylor, where you had guys running unchecked. It's not going to be that, I don't think. But, as long as they get as long as they can get the offensive line put together and get some offensive line play there with the way they've been recruiting at the skill position level, and some of the quarterbacks are bringing in, including big-time pickup, getting Ken Seals the other day, they continue to bring in solid quarterbacks, receivers, and running backs into this system. I think you have to be excited about that. I think the trend is going to be upward point-wise, but none of it's going to matter if they can't protect whoever it is. Now, I will say this. One thing about that is it seems when you take a look at Deuce Wallace, you take a look at Jamil Muhammad, who I thought looked fantastic, by the way, in the spring game, and Ken Seals and even Alan Walters. All those guys are mobile quarterbacks. They're not predicated on staying in the pocket, and if it breaks down, they're just screwed. Those guys can do something with it if necessary. I think that certainly helps out. But as far as the play calling, I can see it first. We keep hearing we don't think it's going to be all that different, maybe some different wrinkles. But until we see it, we're not going to know.
VandyGal78 asks, football recruiting seems to have everyone around here pretty upbeat. How do you see it going? Will this be Mason's best class yet? Have your expectations for this fall changed much after spring practice?
The spring practice, no, spring practice didn't do anything. For one, and I have to say this because I didn't see a whole lot of it on the board, but I wasn't able to attend, but I did watch the spring game, the hour that the SEC network gave us. I'm sorry, that was a complete joke. Not on Vanderbilt's part, on the SEC network. Who in the world was in charge of production there? How do you not know that when you do a sideline report, you don't sit there and watch the sideline report. You watch the action and you listen to the report. Every time they had somebody on, we didn't get to see the play because we had to watch them interview the people. Whoever did that has no idea what they're doing and should not be allowed to do another spring game. We missed a good chunk and portion of plays that we should have seen in the name of interviews. So we didn't really get to see a whole lot, and they didn't do a whole lot. So, no, the spring game itself is not going to change anything. Plus, I haven't seen their opponents play their spring games. Not that you can garner a whole heck of a lot from that. But as far as the recruiting thing goes, man, I'm really excited about the early start. And, you and I talked about this, and getting back to the bowl game, you thought this was going to certainly help out recruiting. And even though they've only got 2 commitments so far, I'm really hyped about both of them. And they seem to be in a good position with, a couple of recruits that I think have an opportunity to come in and really help this program out. So from a recruiting standpoint, I'm really happy. And think about this, Chris. Think about the guys. Now that Turner is finally eligible to catch the big defensive tackle from Marist, and then Derek Green coming in, Davion Davis is an early enrollee who looked pretty good. All of a sudden, we're getting size and potential playmakers on the interior defensive line, which is probably the hardest place on the entire roster for Vanderbilt to recruit. And they seem to be getting some really solid players there who could make a difference on the defensive line. And how great would it be, Chris, if we could stop having people run that football straight up our, right at us and down our throats over and over again. Those are the type of players who could do something about that.
Last question from Dusty Orleans. What position would you like to see a commit from next in football, or specific player if he is high on someone in particular?
For me, and Chris, I'll be interested to hear your answer on this. To me, it's still offensive line. I just think we need a couple more. We need 3 or 4. If I had to pick one person, it would be Graham Barton. There may be higher rated players, but I think they got a great shot at getting him. He fits a position of need, and he's a local cat. Guys like Barton, Wingington, Ray, just the offensive line. I think we need to sign 3 or 4 more, at least, offensive linemen in this class to try to solidify it going forward.
Yeah, that is the position group for me too, because it is starting to get potentially lean. I'm not saying they don't have some players, but they're proven commodities at this point are not many. And I do wonder, could Devin Cochran be gone after this year with the good year? Because he's a very talented player. There was so much movement on that line and breaking in of new faces. It just kind of became obvious quickly. They're going to have to get some fresh bodies because that's an area of need.
Because I think about these young offensive linemen. Who are you looking at and saying, oh, man, he's really starting to bud and turn into something? Because at least so far, and maybe they will, but the McMoores and Dawkins and Stewarts that we're having high hopes for going forward haven't really panned out, at least so far. Now, they're going to be counted on sooner than later, but haven't really panned out to the point where I'm thinking they're going to solidify the line going forward.
No, I mean right now, Devin Cochran is like your most known commodity. He's like the only guy that I can say with certainty is going to be a good SEC football player. And now he's moving sides. He's moving from right to left. So even that doesn't, you know, there's even a caveat with that. Now, I think there's some players that like Grant Miller. We've always liked Cole Clemens. And a lot of times these guys, third and fourth year on campus is when it starts to take. So I'm not saying that it can't. But in terms of your known commodities right now, they're not a lot.
No, and they're going to need Bryce. Hopefully, that Bryce Bailey recovers fully, and they'll need him next year too. Plus, with the potential for grad transfers, over their next year or two, especially while some of these young linemen start to develop, it may be important to at least plug those guys in as temporary fixes for this offensive line. And of course, the guy we mentioned a little bit last week, Tyler Steen. Hopefully he can step up, find a natural position, and play it.
All right. Floor's yours for parting thoughts as we've got to go here in a second.
Man, yeah, we got to go. But, man, this is one of those that we could have turned this one into a 2-hour one if we had the time, because there is so much going on right now. And great comeback the other night, with Western. I was watching that game. And I thought we were finished, man. A couple of dingers got us back into it and come back and win that game. Really like what I see out of this team. Hate we lost to Tennessee on Sunday, but this team is playing some really good baseball right now.
Yes, it is. By the way, I forgot to tell you the craziest thing that's happened. I got reported on my own board this week twice.
You got reported for what?
I don't know. I haven't had time to look, but I thought that was funny. I'm pretty sure I don't want to blacklist myself right now in the middle of a coaching search.
Yeah, no, that's probably not a good idea. Before we get out of here, speaking of this coaching search, are we having a coaching search, or is this going to happen? Is this done? It just I's to dot, T's to cross. Is Jerry Stackhouse going to be the coach at Vanderbilt?
It's not done, as I do this at 4:30 on Thursday, as far as I know, but I'd be really surprised if it's not him, based on the stuff I've heard.
Okay. All right. So you don't think there's any hang-ups that could change the outcome here? It's just more of a matter of when, not if?
I'm not going to say that because I'm not at the negotiating table, but I think I know what the hang-ups are, and they're not uncommon.
Okay. All right. Well, then, all right, Commodore fans, it's time to get behind Jerry Stackhouse. The one thing that we will say is it's going to be interesting. It's going to be an interesting roster in 2019/20. I don't know, outside of some people being on this roster that we don't know about, that it might be hard for anybody to win next year.
If 2018-19 was the most anticipated season in Vanderbilt basketball in recent history, and boy, how strange does it sound to say that now? Is this like the biggest wild card season ahead? Probably, because I can't think of ever having won anything remotely like what's ahead. Of course, I don't even know what's ahead yet, but I think I can say that with confidence yet, or so far.
Well, all I can say is this: when it comes to next season, man, the only thing that I care about, look, I would love to win and win big next year, but what I care about is seeing a team that comes in and does some chin checking, Jack, who we may not have the horses to run in the Derby, but by God, you're going to get everything we've got every night, and we're going to be a disciplined team, and we're not going to sit there and just look lost and play the string out. And from the sounds of it, Jerry Stackhouse is the kind of coach who won't let that happen.
He is Seabass of WNWS in Jackson, Tennessee. Tell folks where they can find you online and where they can find your show.
Thanks, brother. You can find me at Cheap Seats Bass, at Cheap Seats Bass on Twitter. You can find me online at WNWS.com. And if you happen to be in Jackson Monday through Friday on the Cheap Seats on 101.5.
All right. He's Seabass. I'm Chris Lee, the host of the Vandy Sports Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. More episodes coming probably early next week. May squeeze one out on Friday, depending on what happens between now and then in the coaching search. But if not, hope everyone has a great weekend, and we will see you next week.